they're not the ones who created the uncomfortable situation. If it makes the governor unhappy to be told, you know what, there's a lot of suffering in this state, and you seem more interested in comforting the comfortable than in helping the people who are suffering. I mean, I don't, there's not a nice way of saying that. And it does make, it isn't, I mean, and the other thing I would say is even with a sympathetic politician, which I don't think our current governor is incredibly sympathetic, but even with a sympathetic politician, I mean, there's the famous story that people always love to tell about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where a group of do-gooders came in to meet with him. And they had this wonderful plan. It was going to help all these people. And FDR said, well, that's great. Now you need to go out there and make me do it. Because, you know, I mean, part of how somebody who has received money, campaign donations from these well-connected interests, how do they go to those people and say, well, you know, I know you gave me money, but I've got to do something on this? How do they don't do that if everybody's being polite behind the scenes. If everybody's being polite behind the scenes, they've got no choice but to return the favors of the people who did the best behind the scenes favors, because that's the world they're living in.
I just want to see if there's one last question here. Somebody has a killer question.
Well, I'm thinking about something kind of basic, I believe, and that is we can't do anything about something that we aren't aware of or that we don't know about, and how we get information. When I went to see Michael Moore's film Capitalism, The Love Affair, that was one of the things that struck me after watching it was we don't know the depth of occurrences or in the news. We get just, you know, superficial, and it seems like something Bill touched on too about making change involves consciousness raising or making people aware, and that's talking to your neighbors, not just getting on the news, but talking to your neighbors, your co-workers, and bringing about some awareness. But my question is, does it seem like we don't get investigative reporting or writing like we have in the past? Or
if panelists would be willing to respond to that and respond briefly and consider it kind of their final statement, and you can add on anything else about other contexts that have come up here, including Camille's what justifies civil disobedience. If each panelist maybe would take a brief crack at that question and any final statement.
Okay. In terms of your question, I'm always skeptical of any time anybody talks about a golden age. I don't think, I mean, I have, I have a coworker who was doing this type of work, the exact job I'm doing more or less, in 1970. And when we had, times when we had Democratic governors and a Democratic majority in one of the houses, and he says it wasn't any easier then. And he worked. If that was the golden era of journalism, it wasn't any easier working with the press, and it wasn't. I think, I think that there are ways that we're in the best of times, and it's. There's never going to be an easy time to work to make the society more just, because you're asking a lot of people to change the way they see things and actually to do something, which is, so I think, and in terms of, I don't have, again, I'll as to when is civil disobedience justified, I think it's, for me, I think it's it's justified when it's part of a larger movement and it's done in a way that actually increases the goal of that movement rather than when it's done as an individual act of personal, like I have to do this for my personal conscience. I think it's sort of, I think there are people who see it as a path to personal salvation, and there isn't such a thing. I mean, either you're working with other people or you're not. There's no way to make yourself pure enough that you can wash your hands of social evils on your own.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm not sure how investigative journalists get their assignments, but the kinds of people you mentioned talking to or sharing this information with about your concerns, then presenting it to an editor of a newspaper and saying, you have a journalist who'd like to investigate further why this. I think maybe the public ought to begin to insist more often to investigative journalists if they're not doing their job in terms of issues people are aware of. Maybe the journalists are, flooded with a number of different editorial assignments that don't match up with other people's concerns. Maybe people should just be writing letters to the editor on a far more consistent basis and say, hey, what happened to the legislature last time concerning this bill?
And I'm going to switch the terms again back to social inequality, because those are ones that I'm more familiar with thinking in terms of. I don't think we've ever done a good job. I kind of piggyback on Bill. I don't think we've ever done a good job at kind of addressing and bringing attention. A really good job at bringing attention and addressing social inequality. And from my perspective, as long as we continue to see social inequality as based on individuals' choices that they've made, or something to do with the individual's own lack of effort, and that's kind of how I see it played out in kind of in larger society. But as long as we fail to recognize the structural causes of inequality and poverty, then I think that same kind of myth of poverty will be repeated from generation to generation. So I just think that we don't do a very good job of recognizing how we as a society reproduce inequality and how all of our social institutions should be held responsible. And within the community, sociologists themselves do a really poor job sometimes of communicating to the media. So we talk amongst ourselves, we publish journals, we write about social inequality, we talk about social inequality, we meet and we have conferences and we talk to other people that study social inequality, about social inequality. But it wasn't until the last conference that I went to in San Francisco that there was actually a workshop on how to catch the media's eye and keep it while you have it. So kind of how to put your message forth. And so I think part of the disconnect is between academics and talking to people that study poverty and inequality from a structural perspective, and to put it into the media, into a context that more people can be involved in the discussion. So I don't know if that's kind of how I see it. We just need to focus from the individual to the structural problems.
We've talked about big issues, although what we've done today is maybe just one small step in working on the big issues around us. I wanted to thank the panelists, but first I just wanted to mention that Dan Fairbanks is in attendance here, and he's going to be our special speaker November 15th, where he will sculpt a bust of Darwin as he talks about Darwin's life and ideas. I wanted to personally thank the panelists, and I know you'd like to thank them as well. We do have 2 wine glasses for each of them with the St. Mark's logo engraved on it. But please join me in giving them a round of applause. There is more